My fiancé of 5 years, Ryan, stood there, hand in hand with my sister, Zoe. He looked at me, completely unapologetic, and said, "Eve, you are a perfect plan, but Zoe, she's a hurricane, and I need a hurricane." Zoe just tightened her grip on his arm, a triumphant smirk on her face. "You've always had everything," she said. "Now it's my turn." My name is Eve Carter, and I am 29 years old. At 29, I believed in the power of a perfect plan. It was my religion. And the late afternoon Miami sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my brickle high-rise, casting long, sharp shadows of the city's skyline across my white oak floors. I had just closed a multi-million-dollar design contract, a career-defining win. I swirled the chilled Chardonnay in my glass, the crisp notes of green apple and pear, a cool reward against the humid air. Everything in my life was exactly where it was supposed to be, curated with the same precision I applied to a high-end architectural blueprint. Control. It was my love language. And tonight was for Ryan. A surprise. I'd stopped at the market on the way home, the bag on my marble countertop, to holding the ingredients for his favorite meal, pan-seared scallops with a lemon butter sauce. Beside it, a bottle of 2016 Opus 1, a testament to how far we'd come. I glanced at the 3-carat diamond on my finger. It wasn't just a ring, it was a symbol of a future I had meticulously architected over 5 years. It was proof that my life, our life, was a perfect plan. A plan I had poured my soul into building piece by perfect piece. I thought about him, about us, and a familiar sense of deep, quiet satisfaction settled over me. Everything was in its place. From the 7-figure contract to the temperature of the wine, this was the life I had designed, not one I had simply fallen into. In his apartment in Coconut Grove, with its lush greenery and the faint, salty smell of the bay, always felt like a tranquil escape from the steel and glass of Brickell. It was our shared sanctuary, so I used my own key, pushing the heavy oak door open with a quiet anticipation. The silence that greeted me was immediate and unnerving. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty home, it was a heavy, watchful silence. And then I saw them. And discarded near the entryway was a pair of royal blue Manolo Blahnik stilettos. My breath caught in my throat. I knew those shoes intimately. I had saved for 3 months to buy them for Zoe's 25th birthday, putting them on a wait list, hoping she would finally understand the value of hard work, of earning something beautiful. I tried to reason with the panic rising in my chest. "It's nothing, you're overthinking, she's messy, she probably just stopped by." But then a sound drifted from the bedroom. A giggle. It wasn't a polite, sisterly laugh. It was intimate, unrestrained, and joyful. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. An icy dread, cold and sharp, snaked its way up my spine. A chilling premonition that something in my perfectly designed world was about to shatter. The air in my lungs felt thick, heavy, as I took a hesitant step forward. The bedroom door swung open, and Ryan emerged first, a white towel slung low on his hips, his hair damp. He froze, his casual confidence evaporating in an instant. And then, like a ghost materializing from my worst nightmare, Zoe appeared behind him. My sister. She was wearing Ryan's pale blue Brooks Brothers Oxford shirt, the one I had ironed for him just yesterday morning. Its sleeves were rolled up her slender arms, the front unbuttoned just enough to be suggestive. Time seemed to warp, to slow down and stretch into an unbearable eternity. The air crackled with the unspoken truth. And they stared at me, cornered. The initial shock on their faces quickly melted away. replaced by something harder, something defiant. It was Ryan who spoke first, his voice devoid of the warmth I had known for 5 years. He looked at me, not with regret, but with a chilling clarity. "Con Eve," he said, his voice flat. "You are a perfect plan, but Zoe, she's a hurricane, and I need a hurricane." And the words didn't just hurt, they eviscerated me. A plan, something to be executed, not loved. As if on cue, Zoe stepped forward, slipping her hand into Ryan's, a gesture of brazen ownership. She looked directly at me, and in her eyes I saw no shame, no remorse, only the glittering triumph of a lifelong competition, finally won. "And you've always had everything, big sister," she said, a victorious little smile playing on her lips. "Now it's my turn." And I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The capacity for sound had been stolen from my lungs. My throat closed, a knot of pure, unadulterated pain. There was a strange buzzing in my ears, a white noise that drowned out everything but the sight of them standing there, a united front against me. My world, my meticulously designed, perfectly executed world, had just been demolished. And with a calmness that terrified me, I reached for my left hand. The 3-carat diamond felt alien, a cold, heavy lie against my skin. I slid the ring off my finger. The platinum band, once a symbol of a forever promise, now felt like a shackle I was finally removing. I walked to the marble kitchen island, the one we had picked out together, and I placed the ring on its cool, unforgiving surface. And it made a single sharp sound. Unclick. And it was a dry, final, echoing sound. The sound of a lock disengaging. The sound of a story ending. And then I turned and walked away, leaving my perfect plan, my perfect future, lying broken on the counter behind me. And for 3 agonizing days, I existed in a state of suspended animation, a numb shock that insulated me from the full force of the wreckage. The world outside my window continued its vibrant, sun-drenched Miami rhythm, but inside my apartment there was only a heavy, gray, suffocating silence. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't slept, I was simply waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring, for a text message, for some sign that my family, my foundation, would rally around me, would be the sanctuary I desperately needed. When my mother's name, Susan, finally flashed on the screen, a fragile, desperate tendril of hope unfurled in my chest. I answered, my throat tight, praying for a comforting voice, for an anchor in the hurricane they had created. And what I got was another knife, this one serrated, twisted slowly for maximum damage. "Sneeve, honey, oh," she began, her voice a familiar, syrupy sweet performance, a sound I now recognized as carefully constructed artifice. "I know you're hurting, but you have to try and think about Zoe, too. She's just devastated." And I was rendered speechless. The word hung in the air, a monument to absurdity. Devastated? Was that the word for the victor? My silence was a chasm, but my mother rushed to fill it, her words tumbling out in a well-rehearsed cascade of emotional manipulation. "You know how love is, sweetie. It's messy. The heart wants what it wants. Ryan told me. He said there was a connection with Zoe he never had with you." She paused, a calculated beat to let the poison sink in. "Look, you're the strong one, Eve. You always have been. You have your incredible career, your independence. Zoe, well, you know she's more sensitive. She needs to be protected, to be looked after. For once in your life, can you just think of your sister?" Every syllable was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She wasn't just excusing their betrayal. She was fundamentally reframing it as my fault. My strength was now a liability. My independence, a reason I didn't deserve good comfort or defense. She was not so subtly implying that I, with mine perfect plan, was somehow cold and unlovable, while Zoe, the hurricane, was full of a passion that was irresistible. She wasn't asking me to forgive. She was asking me to carry the burden of their happiness. She's not saying she's sorry for me, I thought, a cold, hard realization dawning. She's sorry this is inconvenient for her. And the next stage of my public trial was a mandatory non-reconciliation dinner. My father, David, had called me, his voice strained and weary over the phone. "Your mother thinks it's for the best, Eve, to clear the air." I knew it was a losing battle. To refuse would only prove their point that I was stubborn. So I went. When I arrived at my childhood home, the scent of my mother's pot roast filling the air, they were already there. Ryan and Zoe sitting side by side on my parents' familiar floral sofa, their hands intertwined, a perfect, sickening portrait of stolen love. The dinner was a surreal, nightmarish performance. Zoe sniffled intermittently into a napkin, whispering empty phrases like, I never meant for this to happen." Ryan remained stoically silent, the picture of a tragically conflicted man, a role he played with nauseating perfection. My mother kept piling food onto my plate, a gesture of uncaring that felt more like force-feeding. We're a family, Eve. Families forgive. That's what makes us strong." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I said nothing, my silence a fragile shield. I focused on the pattern of the porcelain, the weight of the silverware in my hand. Finally, my mother sighed dramatically, a sound designed for an audience. She looked pointedly at my father. "Tenny, you see, David, she's always like this, so stubborn, never willing to bend, always has to be right." And that was it, the final straw. The public accusation that my profound pain was merely a childish refusal to cooperate. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping loudly against the tile floor, a harsh protest in the tense silence. I couldn't be in that room for one more second. I stood up to leave. "Sis, don't go. I'm sorry," Zoe pleaded, her voice thick with false tears as she reached for my arm. Done, but it was Ryan's voice that cut through the air, cold and dismissive. "Let her go, Zoe. She needs time to accept that the world doesn't revolve around her." And he said it right there, in front of my parents. A public execution of my character, and they were the silent spectators. I turned to my father, my last hope, my supposedly silent ally. I begged him with my eyes to say something, to defend me, to show me I wasn't entirely alone in this twisted family court. And he just looked down. He stared at his plate, meticulously pushing a mound of mashed potatoes around, with his fork as if it held the secrets to the universe, as if the texture of a root vegetable was more compelling than the complete annihilation of his daughter's heart. In his silence was the cruelest betrayal of all. It was louder than my mother's accusations, more painful than Zoe's tears, more final than Ryan's contempt. In that moment, watching my father choose his mashed potatoes over me, I understood with a soul-crushing certainty. I was utterly and completely on my own. And I walked out of that house, got into my Audi, and drove without a destination, the city lights blurring through my unshed tears. I ended up in a deserted parking lot off Old Cutler Road, the car's engine ticking quietly in the humid night air. The street lights cast a sickly, lonely yellow glow. I pulled out my phone. It felt heavy in my hand, a conduit to a world I no longer wanted to be a part of. One by one, I found their names. Unmom, click, block contact. Dad, click, block contact. Zoe, click, block contact. On Ryan, click, block contact. And with each decisive tap on the screen, I felt a strange and hollow sense of relief. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a severing, a deliberate, conscious decision to cut the ropes that were drowning me. This silence, this self-imposed exile, was the first brick in the foundation of a new life. A life I would have to build entirely alone. Eo and I moved out of the Brickell apartment within a week. The air there had become unbreathable. Every meticulously chosen piece of furniture, every framed photograph, held a memory that now felt like a shard of glass in my heart. I couldn't look at the sleek Italian leather sofa we had debated over for weeks without remembering his laughter. I couldn't stand on the balcony where we'd shared countless bottles of wine while watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink without feeling like a fool. So I packed my life, our life, into sterile brown cardboard boxes and fled. Dan and I found a minimalist, anonymous apartment in Wynwood. It was a place with no history, no ghosts. The neighborhood itself was a stark, almost cruel contrast to my internal landscape. Its walls screamed with vibrant, chaotic graffiti, a riot of color and life that felt like a mockery of the monochrome world I now inhabited. Inside my new apartment, there was only the sterile white of unpainted walls and the echo of my own footsteps on the polished concrete floor. I sat there for hours, surrounded by sealed boxes, a stranger in my own life. The silence was a physical presence, a heavy blanket, broken only by the distant wail of a siren and the frantic, unsteady rhythm of my own heart. It was in that crushing silence that the full weight of my loss settled in. I hadn't just lost a fiancé and a sister, I had lost a future. The entire meticulously drafted blueprint of my life had been incinerated, leaving nothing but ash. And living in Miami, the city I had once loved with a fierce pride, became a daily exercise in navigating a minefield of memories. It was a city of ghosts, and I saw them everywhere. Driving over the soaring arc of the Rickenbacker Causeway, the familiar view of the bay would trigger a gut-wrenching flashback to our sunrise runs, the salty air filling our lungs as we raced each other to the top. I couldn't even think about going to Joe's Stone Crab in South Beach, our celebratory spot for every milestone, without tasting the ash of betrayal alongside their famous key lime pie. Even South Beach itself, that iconic stretch of sand where Ryan had knelt on one knee and promised me a lifetime of forevers, was now forbidden territory, a wound too raw and septic to touch. My city, my vibrant, beautiful city, had been stolen from me. Every corner, every street, every beloved haunt was now branded with their story, not mine. I felt like an exile in my own home, haunted by the ghosts of a life that was no longer mine to live. They had not only taken my future, they had colonized and poisoned my past. And at work, I was a machine, a high-functioning automaton. I was still Eve Carter, brilliant creative director. I threw myself into my job with a desperate manic energy that bordered on self-flagellation. I worked late, arrived early, took on the most difficult, soul-crushing projects, and volunteered for every impossible deadline. My colleagues praised my dedication, my laser focus. "Eve's on fire," I heard one of them whisper in the break room. They saw the results, the polished presentations, the successful campaigns that brought in new clients. They didn't see the hollowed-out woman behind the professional, curated smile. They didn't notice the weight I was losing or the dark, bruised circles under my eyes that even the most expensive touche éclat concealer couldn't hide. This mask of competence was both my armor and my prison. It got me through the days, one billable hour at a time, but it also locked me away, isolating me so completely that no one could reach the real fractured person underneath. I was dying from the inside out, and no one even knew I was sick. One Friday night, weeks later, the facade finally irrevocably cracked. The office was dark and silent, a tomb of glass and steel. Everyone else had long gone, to start their weekends, to live their lives. I was alone, staring out at the glittering, indifferent skyline of the city that had betrayed me. And then a sob escaped my throat, a raw, guttural sound I hadn't realized I was holding back. It was followed by another and another, until I was crying uncontrollably, my body shaking with the force of weeks of repressed grief, humiliation, and white-hot rage. The tears were hot and cleansing. In that moment of complete, undignified collapse, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't outrun the ghosts or mask the pain forever. My hands shaking, I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over the one name I had avoided calling, the one I'd seen as a sign of weakness. Chloe had given me the number weeks ago. "It just in case," she'd said, her eyes full of a wisdom I hadn't been ready to accept. It felt like a lifetime ago. Finding the number of a therapist felt like an admission of defeat, a final humiliating surrender. But as I sat there, broken and alone in the dark, I realized it wasn't surrender at all. It was the first sign of hope. In the phone call to the therapist's office was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My voice was a weak, trembling whisper, the voice of a stranger. But the architects of my healing were waiting. They arrived not with judgment, but with blueprints for a new foundation. Chloe was the first responder. She didn't just bring pints of Jenny's splendid ice creams, specifically the brown butter almond brittle flavor she knew I loved, and bottles of Oregon Pinot Noir. She showed up at my sterile Wynwood apartment with moving boxes of her own, filled with things from my old life she knew I'd want but couldn't bear to retrieve myself. She rolled up her sleeves and helped me unpack, transforming the empty space into something resembling a home. One afternoon, as I sat on the floor amid a sea of bubble wrap, I started down the familiar spiral of self-blame. Maybe if I had been more spontaneous, more like a hurricane. And Chloe stopped what she was doing, walked over, and gently took the pint of ice cream from my hands. She looked me straight in the eye, her gaze firm and unwavering. "Stop it, right now," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This is not on you. This is on a weak man who couldn't handle a strong woman and a venomous snake who craves whatever she can't have. The only mistake you made, Eve, was being too damn good to both of them." Her words were not just comforting, they were a lifeline. Chloe was my truth-teller, an anchor of fierce, unshakable loyalty that held me to reality when I was about to be swept away by a tide of self-doubt. My first session with Dr. Alan Grant was the following week. His office in Coconut Grove was a sanctuary shaded by ancient banyan trees, a world away from the harsh glare of my recent life. He was an older man with kind eyes and a profound, empathetic silence that invited honesty. I expected him to ask me about my childhood, to dig for Freudian explanations. Instead, he just listened. I told him everything, the words spilling out in a messy, disjointed torrent. The perfect plan, the hurricane, the shoes, the mashed potatoes. When I finally fell silent, exhausted, he didn't offer any placating platitudes. He simply nodded slowly. "Eve, he said, his voice calm and validating. What you're experiencing is known as complex relational trauma. A simultaneous betrayal from your primary support system, your partner, and your family creates a uniquely deep and disorienting wound. Your feelings of shock, rage, and confusion are not just valid. They are a perfectly rational response to an irrational situation. And hearing him give my pain a name, a clinical definition, was like a pressure valve being released inside my soul. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel crazy. I felt seen. The shame I had been carrying, the secret fear that I was somehow broken or overreacting, began to dissipate under the gentle light of his professional validation. He gave me permission to feel exactly what I was feeling. And under the dual guidance of Dr. Allen's wisdom and Chloe's unwavering friendship, I began to take the first tentative steps toward rebuilding. It wasn't about reclaiming my old life. It was about building an entirely new one, a life that was solely mine. These weren't grand, dramatic gestures. They were small, quiet acts of self-reclamation. Knit was buying a single, beautiful Boston fern and placing it in a sunlit corner of my new apartment. A small promise of life in the empty space. It was discovering Panther coffee in Wynwood, sitting alone at a small table and savoring the rich, dark taste of a properly brewed espresso, learning to enjoy my own company again. It was signing up for a Tuesday night pottery class, feeling the cool, damp clay spinning beneath my hands on the wheel, the simple, grounding act of creating something new and whole out of a formless lump. Sneech action was a small brick laid in a new foundation. It was fragile, yes, but it was mine. For the first time in months, a sliver of peace began to settle in my heart, a quiet, cautious sense of hope. In one Thursday evening, I returned home from my pottery class, my hands smelling of clay, a small, imperfect bowl I had made clutched in my bag. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a gentle, uncomplicated contentment. I decided to check the mail, a mundane task. I sifted through the usual junk mail and bills. In and then I saw it. In lying at the bottom of the pile was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy in my hand. The address was written in a familiar, looping script of shimmering gold ink. Zoe's handwriting. My heart stopped. The fragile piece I had spent weeks carefully constructing shattered into a million pieces. That envelope wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a ticking time bomb delivered directly to my door, and I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that the storm was far from over. My hands trembled as I tore open the seal of the ivory envelope, the thick paper resisting slightly, as if protecting the poison within. The invitation itself was a masterpiece of classic elegance, the kind of thing I would have designed myself. Thick, expensive cotton stock. Glimmering gold script announcing the union of Zoe Carter and Ryan Davies at the magnificent, historic Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables. It was a fairy tale wedding invitation for a fairy tale I was supposed to be living. But it wasn't the formal card that made the blood freeze in my veins. Tucked inside, with a sickeningly sweet pretense of thoughtfulness, was a smaller, handwritten note on matching stationery. Zoe's perfectly rounded, loopy handwriting, the same script that used to fill birthday cards with girlish affection, now seemed to dance mockingly on the page. "Hun, dearest Eve," it began, the word dearest a sharp, bitter irony. "I know this must be so hard for you, but I truly, truly hope you'll be there. It would mean the world to Ryan and me if you would stand beside me as my maid of honor on the most important day of my life. After all, you're my only sister. "I love you, sis," in maid of honor. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. It was a gasp, then nothing. The request wasn't just insensitive, it was a calculated act of psychological cruelty. It was a demand for my public endorsement of their treachery. She wanted to parade me on that altar in a pastel dress, a living trophy of her conquest, a smiling, silent prop to legitimize her victory in front of all our friends and relatives. She wanted me to hold her bouquet while she recited her vows to the man who was supposed to be my husband, to watch him put a ring on her finger. It was a declaration of war disguised as a loving, sisterly request. The next morning, the coordinated assault began, as if they had strategized it. My phone, which I had foolishly unblocked in a moment of weakness, buzzed with my mother's name. Her voice was like honey laced with arsenic, sickeningly sweet. "Haneve, darling, you got the invitation, I assume? It's just beautiful, isn't it? I do hope you're going to handle this like the mature adult you are. This is your sister's day, her one special day. Please don't make it awkward for her with any residual selfishness." And I stayed silent, gripping the phone, focusing on my breathing, a simple in and out technique Dr. Allen was teaching me. My silence only fueled her. If you don't go, what will people think?" she continued, her voice now laced with that familiar tone of manipulative, high-stakes concern. "They'll think you're bitter, that you can't move on. You'll be embarrassing the entire family. Think of the gossip. Your father and I won't know where to look. Is that what you want? To humiliate us because you can't be happy for your own sister?" Each word was a precision-guided missile aimed directly at my deepest insecurities. My fear of being judged, of being seen as the pathetic, jilted woman. She was using the weight of family honor, of social appearances, to shackle me into compliance. I was to be sacrificed on the altar of what people will think. But the final devastating blow came that evening after a long day of pretending to function at work. It was my father. His voice on the line was tired, drained. The voice of a man who had already surrendered in a battle I didn't even know he'd fought. "In Eve," he sighed, and I could picture him in his leather armchair, rubbing his temples. "Your mother has a point. Maybe you should just go. Just for a little while. Show your face, be graceful, for the sake of keeping the peace." The last of my defenses crumbled. Keeping the peace. Peace for whom? Certainly not for me. It was peace for them. Peace at the cost of my dignity, my sanity, my soul. In that moment, the full crushing weight of my isolation crashed down on me. I had been abandoned by everyone. My family, the people who were supposed to be my staunchest defenders, were actively conspiring to push me into a public performance of my own humiliation. They weren't just asking me to attend a wedding, they were demanding I participate in a play where I was cast as the gracious, smiling loser. In a cold, hard anger, different from the hot, tear-filled rage I'd felt before, began to crystallize in my core. It was the anger of an animal pushed too far into a corner, with nothing left to lose. I would not run, I would not hide, and I would not give them the supreme satisfaction of seeing me broken. Is and I would go. Kyo and I sat on my sofa for a long time after that call, the heavy, beautiful invitation clutched in my hand. It felt like a weapon. A part of me, the wounded, exhausted part, wanted to set it on fire, to watch the gold letters of their names curl into black, indecipherable ash. I wanted to pack a bag, drive to the airport, and book a one-way ticket to somewhere far away, a place where no one knew my name or my story. In but another part of me, A small, stubborn ember that had refused to be extinguished through all of this roared to life. It roared that I would not let them define me by my pain. I would not let them win by turning me into a fugitive from my own life. I stared at the invitation, at their names entwined in elegant, pretentious script, and a decision, a wild, terrifying, and liberating decision, took root in my soul. And if you were me, sitting there in that silent apartment, holding the invitation to your own personal hell, cornered by the very people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, what would you do? Would you tear up the invitation, block them all again, and protect your hard-won peace? Or would you walk into that wedding with your head held high and face them and the whole world on your own terms? Tell me what you think in the comments. I could really use your advice. Chaninan, Hernin, are you insane? It's emotional suicide, Chloe screamed into the phone, her voice a mixture of horror and disbelief. Sin and I held the phone slightly away from my ear, a cold, calm resolve settling over me. No, I replied, my own voice steady, devoid of the tremors that had plagued it for weeks. It's war, and I'm not going in unarmed. And the next day, Chloe, ever the loyal general, officially launched what she dubbed Operation Phoenix. Our first mission was securing my armor. We descended upon the ultra-luxe Bal Harbor shops, a temple of high fashion. I tried on a dozen safe, predictable dresses in muted pastels and elegant navy blues. With each one, Chloe would cross her arms and shake her head. Nope, you're not going there to blend in, Eve. You're going there to make a statement. And finally, in the sleek, minimalist boutique of Galvan, London, we found it. It was a slip dress of the purest, most unapologetic scarlet silk. It draped over the body like liquid fire, hugging every curve before falling to the floor, its back cut daringly low. The moment I saw myself in the mirror, I understood. This was it. In red, Chloe declared, her eyes shining with strategic brilliance. It's the color of love, of passion, and of danger. It says, look at what you lost, and don't you dare mess with me, all at the same time. But Operation Phoenix was about more than just a dress. It was a complete overhaul, a forging of a new self from the ashes of the old. I hired a personal trainer at Equinox Brickle, a grueling regimen that transformed my grief and fury into fuel. With every deadlift, I imagined pushing away my mother's manipulative words. With every mile I pounded out on the treadmill, I pictured myself leaving the ghost of my past further and further behind. I booked weekly deep tissue massages and facials at the Standard, not to look beautiful for anyone else, but to reclaim my own body, to feel strong and cared for from the inside out. And I continued my sessions with Dr. Allen. I told him about the wedding, about my plan. He listened patiently. An armor is a useful tool, Eve, he said, his voice calm and steady. It can protect you in battle. Just make sure you always know who the person is inside it. His words grounded me, reminding me that this transformation had to be more than skin deep. It was about building an unshakable core of self-worth. On the final, most critical piece of the plan was finding the perfect +1. Chloe had a list of eligible bachelors, but I refused. I didn't want a rental, a prop. This needed to feel real, at least to me. And then, 3 weeks before the wedding, fate, or perhaps the universe's sense of irony, intervened. I was at a charity auction for the Perez Art Museum, Miami, feeling surprisingly confident when I turned too quickly and spilled an entire glass of champagne down the front of a man's impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit. Mortified, I started apologizing profusely. And he just laughed, a deep, easy sound. "Don't worry about it," he said, dabbing at the stain with a napkin. "At least now I have a valid excuse to buy a new one." He was handsome, devastatingly so, with intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was Leo Maxwell, the renowned architect. And we talked for the rest of the evening, an effortless conversation that flowed from modern art to the structural integrity of Miami's oldest buildings. After a few more dates over coffee and late-night walks, I decided to take a leap of faith. I told him everything, the whole sordid, painful story. He listened intently, his expression unreadable, and I braced myself for the inevitable, awkward retreat. Instead, when I finished, he simply smiled. "I get it," he said. "I'll go with you. Consider it an adventure. Besides," he added, a mischievous glint in his eye, "I'm excellent at charming meddling mothers and making ex-boyfriends insanely jealous." As the wedding date drew closer, a strange and unexpected shift happened within me. The dread that had been a constant companion began to recede, replaced by a nervous, fluttering excitement. I found myself looking forward to my time with Leo, to his quick wit and calming presence. The relationship that had begun as a strategic alliance was starting to feel real. The lines were blurring. Was he just a part of Operation Phoenix, my most valuable weapon? Or was he becoming something more? The question hung in the air, a quiet, hopeful melody beneath the thrumming war drums of my preparation. The night before the wedding, all the carefully constructed confidence I had built over the past few weeks evaporated. I stood in my suite at the Biltmore, staring out at the immaculate, floodlit golf course, but I saw nothing. My mind was a vortex of fear and self-doubt. The red dress, my so-called armor, hung on the back of the door, looking less like a symbol of power and more like a sacrificial robe. Can I really do this? The question looped endlessly. Or will I just shatter into a million pieces the moment I see them together? So my hands trembled as I typed out a text to Leo, each word an admission of defeat. I don't think I can do this. In a minute later, my phone buzzed. "Come down to the bar. I'm here." A and I found him in the hotel's dimly lit, wood-paneled bar. The space was quiet, an intimate haven of soft leather and warm golden light. He was sitting at a small table in the corner with 2 glasses of Macallan 18 already poured, the amber liquid glowing like a small campfire. He didn't press me with questions or offer empty reassurances. He just slid one of the glasses toward me, his presence a silent, solid anchor in my swirling storm of anxiety. We sat in a comfortable quiet for a long time, the only sound the soft clinking of ice against glass. In it was Leo who finally broke the silence, his voice low and even. "Should 2 years ago," he began, not looking at me, but at the scotch in his glass. I was in a situation not unlike this one." And he told me he had been engaged, set to be married to a woman he'd loved since college. 2 months before the wedding, he found out she was having an affair with his best man, his business partner, the closest thing he had to a brother. "Senmido, the worst part," he said, his eyes now looking somewhere far away, a place I couldn't see, or wasn't losing her. It was the humiliation, the feeling of being a complete and utter fool for not seeing it, the feeling of being turned into a joke by the 2 people I trusted most in the world. And his confession was a key, unlocking a door inside me. A wave of empathy so powerful it brought tears to my eyes washed over me. The tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry, the ones born of pure, unadulterated pain, began to slide down my cheeks. He hadn't tried to fix my pain. He had simply shown me his own. In that quiet, dark-paneled bar, I no longer felt like a singular, isolated tragedy. I wasn't alone. And Leo watched me cry, without a trace of pity, only a deep, profound understanding. He let the silence sit until my tears subsided. Then he looked at me, his gaze direct and piercingly clear. Dunya, are you going to that wedding tomorrow to prove something to them? He asked gently, or to prove something to yourself. The question landed right in the center of my heart, slicing through all the noise and confusion. I thought about it, truly thought about it. The initial impulse, the anger, the Operation Phoenix, that had all been for them, to show them I wasn't broken, but now something had shifted. Itanoia. At first it was for them, I admitted, my voice steadier now. But now it's for me. I need to close this chapter myself on my own terms. A slow smile spread across Leo's face. He nodded. When he walked me back to my room, the charged energy between us was no longer just about strategy or a shared adventure. It had deepened into something else, something real and quiet and strong. At my door, he gently placed his hand on my cheek, his thumb brushing away the last tear. And then he kissed me. It was a kiss that held no urgency, no demand. It was a kiss full of understanding, of shared history, of a silent promise for a new beginning. And after he left, I stood alone in my room and looked at the red dress again. It was still hanging there, a slash of brilliant color in the soft lamplight. But it looked different now. The light hitting the silk made it glow, like embers. It was no longer a suit of armor I was forcing myself to wear. It was a reflection. It was me, the new me. And I was ready. The grand ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel was an architectural masterpiece, a symphony of vaulted ceilings, soaring archways, and the soft golden glow of massive crystal chandeliers. It was a room built for fairy tales, now filled with a sea of pastel silks, black tuxedos, and the low, polite hum of 200 conversations. Chloe had been a maestro with her makeup brushes, giving me a subtle smoky eye that made me feel mysterious, and a bold, classic red lip that matched the dress. It was a shade of red that felt like a declaration. When Leo arrived at my suite door, he simply stopped, his breath catching for a moment. "Eve," he said, his voice a low murmur of appreciation. "Yoba, you are not a hurricane. You are a wildfire." When the heavy, ornate doors to the ballroom swung open, and we made our entrance, a hush fell over the room. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-like silence, but a subtle dip in the ambient noise, a collective momentary pause as every head turned. My dress was a slash of pure, unapologetic crimson in a muted sea of polite, socially acceptable colors. It was a statement of intent. Leo, impossibly handsome in his perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, placed a steadying, reassuring hand on the small of my back. We didn't lurk in the corners or attempt to hide behind a towering floral arrangement. We walked with purpose directly into the heart of the room, smiling, nodding, greeting the friends and distant relatives I hadn't seen in months. My confidence a shield forged in the fires of the past few weeks. And I could feel his eyes on me, Ryan. From across the room, past a sea of faces, I saw him standing beside his bride at the head table. His gaze was locked on me, his jaw slightly slack. It wasn't a look of anger, but of stunned, wide-eyed disbelief, as if he were seeing a stranger he vaguely recognized. I met his stare for a brief, charged moment, offering a small, serene smile, before turning my attention back to Leo. Beside him, Zoe's own smile was frozen, a brittle, painted-on thing that didn't reach her eyes. Her hand tightened on Ryan's arm, her knuckles white. And my mother. I caught a glimpse of her face, a fleeting expression of shock, and something that looked suspiciously like maternal disapproval. Good, I thought, a spark of cold satisfaction igniting within me. Operation Phoenix is officially underway. And the dinner was a blur of polite, meaningless conversation and exquisitely prepared food I barely tasted. The Chilean sea bass might as well have been cardboard. I was running on pure adrenaline. The toasts began after the main course. Ryan's best man, a fraternity brother, gave a rambling, unfunny speech filled with inside jokes. The maid of honor, a bubbly college friend of Zoe's, cried through her entire saccharine tribute. And then Zoe herself stood up, a vision in white lace, tapping her champagne glass for attention. She took the microphone, her hand trembling, with what I knew, with an expert's certainty, was feigned emotion. "Nin, they say," she began, her voice quivering artfully, "that true love always finds a way home." She paused, her eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second, a tiny venomous glance meant only for me. And sometimes a man has to wander down a safe, predictable, and perhaps a little boring path for a little while, to realize which hurricane he truly belongs in. And she let the insult hang in the air, a deliberate, public humiliation wrapped in a pretty metaphor. The room grew quiet, the air thick with awkwardness. I could feel the pitying stares of my aunts and cousins, their heads tilted in sympathy. They saw a victim, and that was the one thing, after all this, I refused to be. She raised her glass, her smile widening. "In he may have been her first draft," she declared, her voice now ringing with smug, undeniable triumph. "But I am his final perfect edition." In the applause was scattered, hesitant, and died out quickly. The MC, a man with a practiced plastic smile, sensed the social disaster and quickly tried to move on. "Wonderful, wonderful, such beautiful words. Now before we open up the dance floor for our happy couple." But I was already standing up. And I didn't push my chair back aggressively or make a scene. I simply rose with a quiet, deliberate grace, a small, calm smile on my face, as if I'd been on the program all along. The entire room, all 200 guests, fell silent. All eyes, without exception, were on me. I walked to the stage, the silk of my dress whispering around my ankles with each confident step. The flustered MC, seeing the determination in my eyes, simply handed me the microphone. Sinai held it, letting the weight of it ground me, letting the silence stretch for one beat, then two. I looked directly at the head table, my gaze sweeping over my mother's tight, disapproving face, my father's suddenly fascinating dinner plate, and finally settling on the bride and groom. "No, thank you, Zoe," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the speakers so that it filled every corner of the grand ballroom. "Your words were truly inspirational. They made me realize something incredibly profound tonight." And Zoe's triumphant smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his collar suddenly looking too tight. "Juana, you see," I continued, my voice imbued with a calm, unshakable confidence I didn't know I possessed until this very moment. For a long time, I thought I had lost everything. I grieved for a future that was stolen from me. But the truth I now realize is that I wasn't robbed. I was liberated. I was set free from a story that was never truly mine to begin with. A story I was trying too hard to write. And I turned my head slightly, my eyes finding Ryan's. I didn't look at him with hatred, but with a kind of detached clarity. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you for showing me the critical difference between being someone's perfect plan and being their heart's choice. You taught me a lesson in my own value that I could never have learned otherwise. And his face paled, the color draining from it. I then turned my gaze to my sister, the victorious bride in her white dress. Hintinu. And Zoe, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, a surgeon's touch before the final precise incision. Thank you. Thank you for being so willing to pick up a first draft that I had already decided to discard. Your enthusiasm has freed me. It has cleared the space in my life and in my heart for a true masterpiece. With perfect timing, I looked out into the crowd, and my eyes found Leo. He was already rising from his seat, a proud, beautiful, incandescent smile on his face. I reached my hand out to him as he joined me on the edge of the stage, his warm, strong hand enclosing mine, a silent declaration of his own. And I raised my free hand as if holding a champagne glass to the light. So I wish you both, I said, my voice ringing with an undeniable, unshakable finality, the exact happiness that you both so richly deserve. And for one long, breathless second, there was absolute, stunned silence. And then the room erupted. It wasn't polite, scattered applause. It was a wave of genuine, heartfelt, thunderous clapping that rolled through the ballroom. They weren't clapping for a vicious takedown. They were clapping for elegance, for strength, for a woman who had refused to be a victim and had instead rewritten her own ending with untouchable grace and power. Anna, through the roar of applause, I saw the aftermath clearly. Zoe, her face as white as her expensive dress, turned and fled the stage, stumbling slightly as she rushed towards the ladies' room. Ryan sat frozen in his chair, staring into space like a man who had just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. And my mother, my own mother, looked at me for the first time in my entire life with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a terrifying mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps a tiny flicker of fear. Itanai handed the microphone back to the stunned MC. Leo squeezed my hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. We didn't say another word. We didn't need to. Our work here was done. We turned, and together, we walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of their perfect day behind us. The adrenaline from the ballroom carried Leo and me out into the warm, humid Miami night. We didn't speak on the ride back. There was nothing to say. A profound sense of release, of a heavy weight finally lifted, settled between us. The war was over. Now came the aftershock. As we waited for the valet in the grand Spanish-style portico of the hotel, a frantic figure intercepted us. It was Zoe. Her face was a mess of tear-streaked mascara and blotchy red skin. The triumphant bride was gone, replaced by a distraught, unraveling girl. "Hitnyama, why?" she sobbed, her voice raw and accusing. "Why did you have to do that? Why couldn't you just scream at me? Why do you always have to make everything look so easy?" And for a brief, stunning moment, the curtain of malice was pulled back, and I saw the insecure little girl who had lived in my shadow her entire life. A girl so desperate for her own spotlight that she was willing to burn down my world to get it. The old Eve would have felt a pang of guilt, a need to comfort her. But the new Eve simply felt a deep, profound sadness for the both of us. "No, because your war isn't my war, Zoe," I said, my voice calm and devoid of anger. "I truly hope you find what you're looking for, not in Ryan, but in yourself." In that moment, I felt no hatred, only a quiet pity for a victory that had clearly brought her no joy. Just as we were about to get into Leo's car, another ghost from the evening appeared. Ryan. He looked lost, disoriented, as if he'd woken up in a foreign country. He fumbled for words. "Ew, Eve, I had no idea. You look, He trailed off, unable to finish a single thought. And I looked at the man I had once planned to spend my life with, and I felt nothing but a distant sense of detachment. The chains were well and truly broken. "Well, you don't have to say anything, Ryan, Harui," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I honestly wish you happiness." I saw it then in his eyes, not love, not even remorse for the pain he'd caused. I saw the simple, pathetic regret of a man who had made a bad bet and was just now realizing how much he had lost. That was the final closure I needed. The weeks that followed were quiet. Then, inevitably, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, but she called again. I finally answered, bracing myself. Her voice was sharp with recrimination. No, I cannot believe what you did, Eve. You humiliated your sister on her wedding day. Their honeymoon in St. Bart's was a disaster. They argued the entire time, and it's all your fault." And the Eve of the past would have absorbed the guilt, would have apologized for having feelings, but that Eve was gone. Kenny and I took a deep, steadying breath. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "I love you, but I am not going to discuss this with you anymore. Their happiness is not my responsibility, my peace." I paused, letting the words sink in. "It is my priority now." And before she could launch into another tirade, I gently pressed the red icon on my phone screen. I ended the call. For the first time in my 29 years, I had drawn a hard boundary with my mother, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. It felt like taking my first breath of clean, fresh air after a lifetime in a smoke-filled room. It was terrifying, and it was glorious. And that night, Leo and I were in the kitchen of his beautiful, airy home in Key Biscayne. The scent of garlic and basil filled the air as we made fresh pasta from scratch. A quiet jazz playlist, something by Miles Davis, was murmuring from the speakers. We worked together in an easy, comfortable rhythm, our hands brushing as we reached for the olive oil, our laughter filling the warm space. He told me about a difficult client, and I told him about a breakthrough I'd had on a new design project. It was simple. It was real. And as I watched him laugh, his face illuminated by the soft kitchen light, the contrast hit me with the force of a physical blow. The chaos, the drama, the toxic, conditional love of my old life versus this easy peace, this genuine warmth, this man who had seen me at my most broken and had not tried to fix me, but had simply shown me his own scars. That quiet, peaceful kitchen was more of a home than my childhood house had ever been, and I knew with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones that I was finally on the right path. I was heading north. In 6 months after the wedding, I agreed to attend Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. This time I went alone, not as a statement, but because I felt grounded enough in myself to not need a buffer. The atmosphere was different, stripped of the thick, cloying tension that had defined our family for so long. The conversation with Zoe, for the first time in years, was not a battle. She looked tired, the sharp edges of her triumphant arrogance softened by reality. "Marriage is harder than it looks on Instagram," she admitted quietly, over a slice of pumpkin pie. "Ryan is complicated. Maybe I'll call that therapist you told me about." It wasn't an apology, and I didn't need one. It was something far more valuable, a crack in the facade, an admission of vulnerability. It wasn't total forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something new. a fragile, more honest relationship between two sisters, finally free from the shadow of unspoken competition. Even my mother looked at me differently, with a new, hesitant respect in her eyes. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. And that Christmas, during the annual Night Garden Festival at the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, Leo led me away from the crowds, down a path illuminated by thousands of twinkling fairy lights. The air was filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't present a velvet box. He simply took both of my hands in his gaze warm and serious under the magical glow. "Senine Eve," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur. "I don't want us to rush anything, but I want you to know where I stand. To me, you are not a hurricane, and you are certainly not a plan. You are my true north, my final destination." He smiled. "And whenever you're ready, I want to build a home with you." And he then placed a small, heavy box in my palm. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was not a diamond ring. It was a beautiful antique silver compass. Its needle, steady and true, pointed north. It was the most romantic, most perfect proposal I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a promise of ownership, but a promise of direction, of a shared journey. Fiancé, year to the day after the wedding that had shattered my world, Leo and I were walking barefoot on South Beach. The gentle evening waves lapped at our ankles, and the sky was a soft canvas of lavender and rose. This exact stretch of sand was once a place of immense pain, the ghost of a false promise. For months, I couldn't even drive past it, but now standing here with Leo's hand in mine, it held no power over me. It was just a beach. Te and I looked at the silver compass I now wore on a delicate chain around my wrist. The needle pointed north, as always, and in that moment of profound peace, I finally understood the true, paradoxical nature of my journey. The most devastating betrayal of my life had also been its greatest gift. It had been a violent, painful, necessary act of demolition. It forced me to bulldoze a life that was built on the shaky foundations of other people's expectations and my own desperate need for their approval. It had burned everything to the ground so that I could finally build something real, something that was truly my own, from the bedrock up. As in I had found my true love. It wasn't in a man, not really. It was in the woman I had become in the aftermath of the fire, stronger, wiser, free. And Leo, he wasn't my savior. He was the fellow architect who had shown up, not to rescue me from the ruins, but to stand beside me, hand me a blueprint, and help me build something beautiful and new together. So thank you for following my journey, a journey that began with devastating betrayal, but ended with me finding my own true north. And we all face storms in our lives that force us to rediscover who we are. For me, it was a red dress and a single, powerful speech. What about you? What was the moment you decided to take back your own story? Anne and I would love to read your stories of resilience in the comments below. This is a space where stories like ours are honored. And if my journey today resonated with you, please subscribe channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Senin Kawan.